Great, so we'll begin now. As I said, my name is Caroline Tresise. I am UNDP's Facilitator for the Community of Practice on Energy. It's my pleasure to welcome you here today. This side event is called Accelerating Energy Access Through Technology Innovation, and it is part of the high-level dialogue Ministerial Thematic Forums that are happening this week. It is a pleasure for us to welcome you here today. I am here with moderating today with my colleague Alexandra Soezer, who's the Climate Change Technical Advisor at UNDP. Alex is on the line. Before I hand it over to Alex, I would just like to go through a couple of the housekeeping rules. The webinar will last 1 hour and 15 minutes. Questions may be submitted through the Q&A box and will be answered by the team. We will also have a Q&A following each presentation. As a participant, you may raise your hand to ask your question live or submit it through the Q&A box, and they will be addressed to each speaker following the intervention. The webinar is being recorded and will be made available publicly after the event. Before I pass it over to Alexandra, I would just like to give another warm welcome and introduce my colleague. Alex, over to you.
Yeah, a very warm welcome to our global audience today, and special thanks to our speakers, Katharina, Mihaela, Anthony, and Amon, for joining us in this webinar. Today, we will hear about various aspects of innovation for achieving universal energy access. Innovation may well be the key to success. Over the past decades, technological breakthroughs have made renewable energy systems more affordable and easier to deploy. However, to unleash the full potential of distributed renewable energy systems, we must move faster to power a green recovery and the transition to a low-carbon future. 1 in 10 of the world's people still lacks access to electricity, including half the population of sub-Saharan Africa. Another 2.8 billion people lack access to electricity that is reliable enough to secure their livelihoods or power modern healthcare facilities and schools. And the pandemic has only increased the inequality of global energy access. Achieving universal access to affordable, reliable, and sustainable energy require innovations in energy systems, their planning, and the associated business models. Planning and implementation must be highly efficient, digital, and delivered in the shortest possible time. Technologies must also be simple, flexible, expandable, and specialized for the use case to avoid stranded assets. Placing livelihoods at the center, the infrastructure expansion must align with the development of the communities they intend to serve and their energy demand. In addition, payment and management systems must be cost-effective and automated, and above all, the overarching tariff system must be affordable for a large part of the population. Our panelists will address these challenges from different angles today. We will hear from our first speaker, Katharina, about how pattern recognition processes and artificial intelligence-based algorithms can support governments' top-down strategic decision-making for electrification planning. We will also hear about innovation in network design through algorithms that can find the best possible design solutions. And with planning data and design data, they can then be integrated via cloud-based interfaces, which allows developers to monitor the energy consumption live and make strategic energy planning decisions at the right time. Furthermore, we will hear today from Amon about modular technologies that can build a bridge between limited solar home systems and powerful but expensive mini-grids. The POWER-BLOX cubes, invented by POWER-BLOX, deliver equal power to a solar home system that is slightly too large. However, unlike solar home systems, several cubes can be plugged together based on the Lego principle to create an energy swarm. The power, the battery capacity, and energy generated increases with each cube. Since the system is modular, it adapts flexibly to the needs of the communities. And installing such systems does not require special knowledge. Any installer can complete the task. Mihaela will then talk about block chains for identity management and for tools to document households and track mobile payments. These blockchains can improve the bankability of off-grid solutions and increase the trust of investors in the financial management of revenues generated through productive use activities. And last but certainly not least, Anthony will showcase a concrete example of applied modular systems in the Lelepa nanogrid, a pioneering energy access pilot project on the small island of Lelepa in Vanuatu, implemented by the Department of Energy in the Ministry of Climate Change and Natural Disaster. The project consists of setting up 3 nanogrids to provide clean, affordable, and reliable electricity to the island's 140 households and showcases the viability of the technology solution. The Department of Energy is planning an ambitious scale-up to reach the residents of all inhabited islands of Vanuatu. But now I look forward to a very fruitful discussion, and without any further ado, it's over to our first presenter, Katharina.
Thank you very much, Alexandra. I'm about to share my screen here. Maybe you can just confirm once you can see the PowerPoint slides in full screen mode. Oh, no, that's not happening, right? That's the wrong one.
It's not.
You see the full screen?
No, not yet.
What happened now?
Caroline, maybe you can help.
Yes. So while we do that, I will quickly introduce Dr. Katharina Kader. She is an expert in geographical information systems and rural electrification planning. Katharina joined the Reina Lemoyne Institute in 2012 and acts as co-head of the research unit of off-grid systems. Katharina brings great expertise on the political, geographical, economic, and technical challenges of local energy supply situations. And I will now share Katharina's presentation, or it looks like it's okay now.
I think it should be okay, I hope.
Great. Over to you, Katharina.
Thank you very much for your kind introduction, and sorry for that moment here. So I'm very glad, and thanks to you very much for that invitation, that we have this opportunity here to share a little bit about the research we do, especially in data analysis and also in innovative pattern recognition technologies to make use of data which is available these days to support electrification planning. Just on the background, I'm co-heading the Off-Grid Systems Research Unit at the Reina Lemoyne Institute. That's a German not-for-profit research institution. So we are independent, and our mission is supporting the energy transition towards 100% renewable energy. So within the off-grid systems team, we do this while we look at decentral supply systems to understand what different technology options do we have. We focus specifically on rural electrification planning, where we make use a lot of geospatial data. I will focus on this here mostly. And also it's becoming more and more important to also consider climate resilience and transformation from a socio-economic research perspective. And we are very, very open for collaboration and networking. So we would be very happy to hear from you to elaborate further options. So in this little time I have here, I try to talk a little bit about how we use geographic information systems as a tool to, first of all, map the current status of energy access, to then, based on that knowledge, investigate potential solutions such as mini-grids or solar home systems, also depending on the local resources, to create some kind of decision support by using different data sets. So a few of the examples, what we can actually look at with the geospatial information systems are, for example, the distances from non-electrified locations to existing grid infrastructure, but also the population, or also the number of houses, which we can get from satellite imagery as a proxy for electricity demand. This is very often quite important to understand the overall demand, which can also be very interesting for project developers to understand the potential market for specific solutions. So things like population density is very helpful to know here, but also we look at other infrastructures such as with this pandemic, very often we have a strong focus on health facilities, but also schools and airports can be point of interest where power supply can be of very high relevance, and is also possible to take into consideration during that geospatial analysis. And of course, we also try to track socioeconomic activities, and we use a wide range of available data sets. For example, we use a data set on nightlight emissions. Maybe most of you know this picture from the Earth at night, which is actually available on a very high resolution. So we can zoom in a very detailed level to actually understand where's probably light available at night, and also things such as mobile phone coverage. So when we do this, I have a small example here. Very often we have this very simple threefold process where we start with data collection, then we do data processing and analysis, and then based on this geospatial data, it's very nice that we can visualize this data very well. So it's very easy also for non-technical persons to understand what kind of key messages we can draw from it. And just with like 3 data sets, I have an example here for Nigeria. So we could look at the renewable energy potential, for example, for solar. I didn't put the values here, but in every point in Nigeria, solar irradiation is better than in Germany. So it's actually pretty good. We can overlay this with population information, which we can draw from satellite data, which you can see here now. All the black areas reflect areas which are populated. But then, of course, there's already quite some electrification happening. And here we use the proxy of the nightlight data, which I just mentioned on the other slide, to actually show where do we have emissions of light, which are proxy for street lighting, where there's probably a supply of electricity. But we still see that there are lots of black areas left where electrification is probably still somewhat a challenge, which we could investigate further. And how could that look like? So as I said, very often satellite data forms the basis on the analysis we're actually conducting. So more and more satellite data becomes freely available, and these data sets can be used to kind of extract certain informations which help us, for example, to delineate areas which are populated. So we can actually understand where do the people live, and then we can see what kind of infrastructure would make sense there or is already existing there. And it really helps that more high resolution data is available, because previously that was the limit here, and also the computational power is increasing. This is a very much top-down perspective. And of course, we could even zoom in more. We could use that data already on a national scale, or we can then use it to refine the analysis to actually understand what happens when we go from that national level, maybe in a more regional level. So since the database is becoming better and better, we can then actually overlay it with additional information we may have in certain regions, such as, for example, health facilities, or we can understand the mobile phone network coverage and zoom in, and then also extract all these other information, which can be quite helpful for planning purposes. But also then, of course, this data can be mixed with locally gathered data. So for example, here we could zoom down into a village level. And in this case here, we use data from OpenStreetMap. And actually data was also improved in OpenStreetMap, also based on satellite imagery, to actually see where even the single houses in a village, starting from that national top-down perspective. And that's something which could also be made available online as a web tool. So potential stakeholders could investigate for themselves and understand what would be helpful for example, for their national perspective, but also maybe for their region or district, or even on a smaller level, or for certain project developers to understand if there's a potential market. And to conclude on that, as I said, geospatial data becomes much more easily available. Lots of free data is available. So all these data can be used in order to inform these planning purposes. For example, to understand where do we have regions which are already supplied sufficiently, and then the opposite, where do we have the non-sufficiently supplied regions, and in consequence, the population lacking sufficient access to clean electricity. Also then, on the other hand, understanding the renewable energy potential as these technologies are becoming more and more affordable, to see what the best options would be from that supply perspective. And then we can also use them to create secondary data sets which also could inform other sectors. For example, there's also a lot about these talks about these nexus perspectives that, for example, energy access can also be seen together with water supply, but also with agriculture. There's also a lot of knowledge which can be gained through that. And the geospatial processing methods are evolving. There are lots of tools available which can be used and which are currently further developed, as well as the computational power is also increasing. So like 10 years back or like 15 years back when I was still at university, the same analysis wouldn't have been possible as it is today. So there's a huge untapped potential of these kind of top-down analysis which could be done. But also on the other hand, there's lots of awareness also in the regions where lots of local data is gathered and where field research takes place. And this again then can be used to train algorithms to make even better use of the satellite data which we have available. So in consequence, when we have these both options, we can really inform decision making at very low cost or comparably low costs and lower time effort by first having a top-down analysis. I think it's very, very important to consider local characteristics for in detail planning, but to get a first glimpse, to get a first idea, first perspective, it really makes sense to make use of this, since this is available today and can already provide quite some information. It's something which I'm very happy to see evolve how it is. So to conclude, I think this is a really great opportunity to find untapped potentials for improved electrification planning, and a very great way to support a strategic decision making for the right way to support the achievement of SDG 7. And with this, I'm ready to conclude here, and I'm very happy for any questions you may have. And please feel free to reach out also directly if you would like to discuss further. Thank you.
Thank you, Katerina. What a great intervention. It's quite amazing to see how local and satellite data can be merged to have to really look at the untapped potential that we do have for improved electrification planning. So thank you very much for that. We've actually received one question already. This is from someone through the Q&A. Is it possible to estimate energy consumption based on geospatial information, and can therefore productive use planning also be done with geospatial data? So that question is around productive use planning and whether it can be leveraged for that.
We work a lot on that topic because it would be, of course, very helpful to understand more on potential demand. Since this is always a big question mark when it comes to system sizing and also ability and willingness to pay, to really understand what would people use electricity for. And there are a few good data sets which we can actually use as proxies. One is, of course, the intensity of the night light, but the other one, when we talk about productive use, is also that there are quite good data sets on specific in the agricultural sector on specific crops. So we can really understand what kind of plants do the farmers grow in specific regions, and based on these plant types, we can also estimate what kind of machinery they may use for harvesting and for post-processing of that yields. And that's one of the indicators which we are looking at. But of course, it's challenging to make a very specific, to come to a very specific result for a very specific location. It's a bit easier to give like comparative values to say, well, this area looks like there's much more energy demand than another one. Also, we look at the types of houses. within a country, there could be also very simple built housing structures, and then also the roof types, if it's made out of natural materials, or if it's like concrete buildings, so that there could also be an indicator for the ability to pay, and then also in consequence the demand.
Thank you. And we have another question here. So how do you use algorithms to find out how to adapt the grid to all the different variables you are monitoring? And can you give an example of this? So how are you using the algorithms to find out how to adapt the grid to all the different variables that you're monitoring? And if you have an example of that by any chance.
Yeah, I try to give the answer here. I'm not sure if I get the question to 100%, but well, when we do look at different types of electrification, either central extension of existing grids, but also decentralized options such as mini grids and solar home systems. And when we look at the grid, one of the challenges is also that in very many countries, the current grid infrastructure has lots of limitations in additional supply capacities. So very often we also need to consider that maybe grid extension also doesn't work very well because the grid is already undersupplied and there are blackouts and brownouts and planned scheduling of the load. So that's something we sometimes consider. And then for the grid extension itself, we do consider, for example, minimum spanning tree approaches on understanding how to best connect, if we have like 5 villages, what would be the best way to connect those 5 to the grid in a kind of a least cost way.
Thank you, Katharina. And then just for a final question before we move on. So to which degree are deviations in the data, how does this affect the results of the data?
Yeah, so it really all depends on the quality of the data we have and also on the actuality of the data. So how recent is the data? We've seen very dynamic changes in quite some countries when we look at satellite imagery, which is like 2 years old. Then we look at newer satellite imagery and suddenly the village is double the size or some things like that happen quite frequently. So it actually plays a very big role to have high quality input data, because then of course the output won't be very much usable if the input data is not sufficient enough in terms of quality or yeah, the data of the data, or you really have to have this in mind and think about if you can extrapolate somehow maybe population growth on top of it. But that's a very critical point where also we see quite some limitations in terms of data availability, because often data availability is limiting what we actually can do.
Thank you very much, Katharina. It's extremely informative, and I thank you for your time. So we'll now move on to the next part of our program for today. So the next part will be changing lives, transforming livelihoods of off-grid communities at scale through modular technologies and innovations in network design, a quantitative impact in demonstration. And so our next speaker, I'd like to invite Mr. Armand Martin. He's the CEO, chairman, and co-founder of POWER-BLOX, an award-winning Swiss company that develops disruptive electrification solutions for off-grid applications in Europe, Asia, and Africa. Armand is an entrepreneur with over 20 years experience in new technologies and digitalization. Previously, he co-founded Infocentric, which is now Switzerland's leading agency for digital transformation. So without further ado, I'd like to invite Armand to please take the stage.
Thank you very much. I would right away share my screen for the presentation. I hope you can see it.
Yep.
Okay, so let's jump right into the topic. And our main question that we have asking ourselves based on experience with electrification is, there are 2 solutions on the market for rural off-grid electrification. And we're talking about areas where there's no available electricity before. So we're talking about technology like candles and kerosene. And of course, when it comes to productive use, very simple manual labor. So on one hand, we have solar home systems, which are often direct current, have very low capacity and cannot be extended, and are much more expensive than we think on first sight. And these applications just cover very small, limited use cases. On the other hand, we have mini-grids and larger mini-grids that are very uneconomical, because in order to be economical, they need a critical size, a critical mass. And of course, they still have the problem that the investment that you have to put into a mini-grid is targeted to a future consumption, meaning to have a lot of assets that you have no interest on it from an economical standpoint. So they are almost never economical below at least a few thousand households. So there's a huge solution gap also from a technical perspective between solar home system providing up to 100 watts, maybe 200 watts, and then mini grids that are mostly too powerful and too expensive. So this solution gap. What we have also seen is that there's a solution gap on a geographical level. So for one hand, there are, of course, areas where there's no need for a grid because they are isolated households. Like in this case, we can see it with the yellow bubbles. There are large mini grids where there's meaningful and where it makes sense to build a mini grid from an economical standpoint. But when we talk about the many hundred millions of people around the planet that live in remote communities on remote islands, for instance, like on Vanuatu, there is actually a huge solution gap, because just installing solar home system is not a sustainable solution because it's not, it's limited, and there will be never a grid. So we actually are limiting the development of these communities by design. And in the end, there needs to be somehow a grid that distributes the electricity. So what we were thinking is, can we create a technology that combines solar home system with mini grids? So other to speak, to create a technology where we put everything which makes a mini grid or a solar home system into a box and delivers alternating current. So in our case, we created a larger solar home system that can be used also productive use, very important, that provides enough energy for 24 hours of use a day, has enough battery capacity, and very important, can be stacked together like Lego, without any configuration or engineering. So it's like a peer-to-peer approach, self-configuring decentralized technology, meaning if your demand increases, you just put boxes to box to box to box, meaning that you have actually like a very, let's say, high level or high power solar home system for productive use, which can be extended for mini and nano grids. And the segments that we actually focus is rural electrification. We have no other target than exactly the challenges there for productive use, like grain milling, like ice flaking production, for agricultural use cases, for shops, for workshops, and of course also for private household, where you use the boxes to put them together and to create a mini grid from the scratch. And now the advantage is that from an economical standpoint, that you don't have to install any overcapacity. You don't have any stranded assets, because you always try to have the usage of this mini grid up to 80–90%. So you always utilize the assets from an economical standpoint. And when the demand increases, you just add more boxes. And this concept allows to actually cover areas where we have individual use, like productive use, like a small enterprise that uses a fridge, grain milling, oil pressing machines. We can actually scale that up to kilowatt level. And the same is, of course, in environments like in villages, in small villages, where there's nano grid up to a mini grid for a few hundred households. So what we actually have understood from real data that we now use from our pilot projects, for instance, this example is from Mozambique, where that's the actual consumption, the actual needs of tier 1 level, meaning that the first time people have access to electricity is very, very, very low. So they just need a few lights, maybe a telephone charger. So already a solar home system is an overkill in many cases, and there's no growth available. So in this case, actually, we have a box, but we just need one box for 10 to 50 households, because the energy consumption is so low. So actually, this allows us to grow across the multiple tiers. So even if demand grows, we can just grow with the demand, which is a long-term, safe and sustainable investment also, because there are no stranded assets. And what it means in concrete is now just an example, comparing it now, solar home systems with POWER-BLOX. What is the impact and what is actually the problem? Why we cannot see that many solar home systems? because the investments are still too high for the majority of poor people. Even a very small solar home system, there are different models like down payments and leasing, but in the end, there's always an investment that has to be made, a down payment of maybe around $21. That's an average for a medium-sized solar home system. There's monthly costs rising in all cases. Meaning that even if these people don't have money because it's a phase where they don't get any money, they can pay it, they lose it. Meaning they have a high average cost, and they also have a minimum cost in most cases. So even if they don't use it, which we don't in our case, because we have like a mini grid, we have done not any down payment for the customers, they don't have any investments, and we have a much higher power range and 24 hours a day of electricity. And if a family cannot afford to pay 1 month of energy because it's a pay-as-you-go model, they don't have to pay. And since there's no investment needed to get access, there is actually, this is a very sustainable approach. And now if we think about that, it's about $4 a month where we start. This is data from USAID showing actually cost of solar home system and what it means on the horizontal axis on how many people actually in Mozambique, this is the data from there, could get access to energy. And when we are in the area of around $4, already 55% of the people can have access. If we can get the price down to $2.50, then we can actually bring 70% of the people into the affordability range of these solutions. What is the problem for us is the grid, because the investment into the grid is the major part. And either independent of technology, as long as we don't realize that the grid is the only long-term technology that really allows the people to develop, we will create a lot of stranded assets. That's our conviction with mini grids and solar home systems for the wrong appliances. That was my message that I had. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm now open to questions.
Thank you very much, Alma. You have demonstrated how you've applied this entrepreneurial thinking and serviced the solution gap with a product that actually does adapt and grows with the community, really thinking about the livelihoods of the people that are going to be in need. And that's extremely important. So I really appreciate your intervention. So over to the floor, we've had one question that's already come in. Okay, so this is, what is the minimum energy consumption per household or community to make a low-cost technology like Power Cubes financially attractive for an investor? And then if grants only cover a portion of the CAPEX. Over to you.
The first question, there is no minimal consumption, that we just have to scale it accordingly. So if you see that the minimum consumption is 2 watts a day, we can still do that economically, because the investments are are scaling. Of course, there needs to be some kind of a critical mass of customers, because for just a few people, there has to be enough clients, like 20, 30, 40, that actually then can use the capacity, but there's no minimal consumption. And that's the advantage.
Great.
The second question, can you repeat that, or the combined question? I think there was a second question.
It was a combined cube. So, and then if grants only cover a proportion of the CAPEX, what do you do?
Yes, so that's still the problem with any technology, that without grants, specifically because of the investments that create long-term value, like a grid or this kind of infrastructure technology, it's possible to do it, but we're talking about payback from 7 to 10 years to 13 years, depending on the technology. And this is, of course, difficult for investors. So without grants, regardless of the technology, actually the problem is the grid part and the infrastructure part. When it comes to our technology, it's only about 40% of the cost of such installation. And the major part is actually all the infrastructure that you still need around it.
Okay, so thank you. This is another question from the chat. We have, how are you financing the scale of your production? And do you have relationships or partnerships with local financing institutions? Or are you utilizing external funding to produce the product?
that has been a challenge for us to actually find the right business model in a market that doesn't exist, rural off-grid electrification, to actually find these kind of things. So what we have learned is that, for instance, in Mozambique, we are actually co-investing, meaning that what we do is we also invest from our side equity into projects, and then work with local organizations, funds, investors. That's an important part. Also with banks, of course, it's very difficult. But what we aim to prove is that it's a working business model where we have internal rates of returns on equity of about 10 to 15%, which is quite high for an impact investment. So we are also investing ourselves. We are pooling local investors, and of course also looking for large-scale international investors, because in the case of Mozambique or in the case of Vanuatu, the investments to electrify all these areas is of course staggering.
Thank you very much. So I don't see any more questions. So very much thank you, Armand.
Sorry, Caroline. There's one question from our colleague Emma. She asks if, given that a lot of work and investment has gone into solar home systems, is there a way of transitioning from solar home systems to power blocks to minimize losses?
To a certain extent, the problem can be solved, but of course it's an investment gap that is much higher, meaning that with a solar home system, you just have the solar home system that then can no longer be used, and you replace it with new technology. And that's the problem with solar home systems. You cannot connect them, you cannot extend them. They don't have a long lifespan, etc. So the battery is often not last that long. And then the whole KPIs and the whole story changes completely. So unfortunately, there's not really a shortcut.
Thank you, Armand. So now I would like to pass over to our final speaker. No, not our final speaker. Our third speaker, Dr. Mihaela Ulier, and she is a technology alchemist and is an innovator at the edge of the impossible. At the peak of her academic career, she founded the Impact Institute for the Digital Economy, aiming at policy reforms for the adoption of the latest digital technologies in all areas of society and sectors of the economy. Mihaela was advocated also to include blockchain among the top 10 future and emerging technologies at the World Economic Forum in 2016. Mihaela, I invite you to take the floor.
Thank you so much. So first of all, thank you so much for inviting me to speak. I'm really, my mind-blowing presentations before, and I am in awe at the technologies and the potential. I think I may have a solution for Armand's impact problem. So let's see. Let me share my screen here. Okay. Can you see my presentation?
Yeah.
Okay. So okay. So I was one of these kids which had to learn, because I grew up in a developing country, had to learn at candlelight. As such, when I came across Thomas Edison's quote, "We will make electricity so cheap that only the rich will need to use candles." And being a technologist and an academic, I shifted full power into finding a way to actually get there. That's how I got to the blockchain. But until then, I was investigating together with colleagues a lot of other ways to make it happen. So I started the transaction of Energy Web, and we worked on standards for the smart grid, in which we tackled several of the technological mishaps, which the previous speakers mentioned, the limitations. So we tried to bridge the gap, let's say, between several renewables. Also to bridge the gap between the interdependent networks to which Catherine referred to. So when we talk about the power grid, we now, and the smart grid, of course, now we cannot separate it from the communications infrastructure, from the financial infrastructure. These are all networks of networks. And of course, with the electric cars, also from the transportation infrastructure. But my talk is going to focus now, because I have very little time, on how blockchain can actually address problems which my previous speakers have mentioned. So you mentioned that I contribute to the World Economic Forum with blockchain, and that's how I met in Davos. I met Veronica Garcia on a panel when she was presenting about her work with bit lumens in Latin America. She is from Latin America, and she's very aware of what Armand was also referring to. So they are using kerosene lamps, they do not have electricity. So she wanted to use technology to solve this problem, in particular to use blockchain. So what her purpose was and is to actually get to a safer, more affordable energy in Latin America. And she is using micro solar panels for that, but not only. Also, I hope we will collaborate with POWER-BLOX now that I get to see what amazing work they are doing. So she was walking from home to home and installing these solar panels. The idea is, how can we actually enable people to pay for them? So again, coming back to the investment and the financial problem. Well, blockchain is enabling exactly this, because on one side, we can put sensors around the house which can measure, if I am to call it like that, the good behavior. If they do not use kerosene and they do not pollute and they do not cut the trees and they use the power from the solar panels, then the good behavior is rewarded with tokens which go directly to pay for the panels. So it's like, you know, machine-to-machine transaction or financial system to the machine transaction. This is all solved with smart contract, and as I will show in my next slides. So also, family members who, let's say, live outside or have more money, they can pay for this through blockchain, because they can do micropayments at very reduced cost. So actually, we solve several problems through blockchain: financial inclusion, as well as micropayments. So people can get their own identities, and I will refer to this later. But one thing which is very important, that people can own their data, they can only have that information sent to those who make the decisions. So they are empowered in many, many ways through blockchain, and I will give examples in the future about that. One other thing which this makes possible, of course, through the energy created, is microeconomies around those communities. So they can buy solar water pumps, and then they can start a garden and start to sell the fruit and vegetables which they grow, and so on and so forth. So in order to sum up, in this case, for this example, what is blockchain useful for in this case? First of all, it can keep a credit score and can give them a credit for good behavior, which can go, and Veronica has arranged with the banking system and the financial system in Latin America in several countries, so that the banks can give them accounts for their good behavior. So the credit score is not only what you bought and if you paid loans and so on, if you were already in the financial system with a bank account. So we can use other ways using blockchain to give people bank accounts and microloans, and the credit through a credit score, of course. Blockchain also is allowing, yes, of course, this payment by remittance is for very small transactions, which are not really feasible using the current financial system. And one very important aspect of it, especially that we are here at the UN today, is that through blockchain, we can actually keep a track record and certify and put those certificates on blockchain, how much emission was reduced. So they're practically tracking the CO2 reduction. And I will illustrate further how this can be done. But to sum it up, yes, tokens and blockchain can be used as payment for the devices, to send remittances and also pay for the devices, but also for other expenses, as well as to have access to those behavioral credit scoring directly from the person. So it's not public information. Only they decide what they share. But what is also very interesting is that blockchain is enabling these microeconomies, which I mentioned before. So community members can use tokens to trade the energy. And I really loved when I saw that Lego system and adaptable system, which Armand presented with POWER-BLOX, because that's something which is enabling this exchange, what I call this economy of people as things. In my work, I call this socio-technical combinatorics because my work is mainly concerned with technology and society. So in this case, how is technology used? At the community level, of course, there are several layers here. So we have the renewables and the control systems with the algorithm. I'm a control engineer. Most of my work resided here before the blockchain came into the picture, because the blockchain enabled all these microtransactions that, for example, people can, of course, store the energy. Now with POWER-BLOX, I'm getting even more inspiration about this. So if I produce more than I consume, then I can store the energy in a community, let's say a common pool resource in which the community and my neighbors can also tap into if they need more power than they can produce. So when I store it, I'm being rewarded, obviously through tokens, through those microtransactions. And when they consume, they have to pay, and with tokens. And as such, all these microeconomies are being formed at the community layer. But also, people can get incentivized from the government, for example, through tax or through direct payments for using renewable energy and for the such good behavior, which I mentioned before. So in fact, all this is enabled through blockchain and through self-executable smart contracts. And I call this algorithmic governance, because actually it's through algorithms. For example, if my neighbor wants to use too much from the common pool resource, so for the others it does not remain, the algorithm is putting a cap, so they cannot, it will kind of stop their access to the common pool resource. And all this is done automatically. So the grid and all this ecology is governed algorithmically. And of course, people can intervene, but we in the blockchain world trust our algorithms. So, maybe have heard about the distributed autonomous organization. And of course, the microtransactions can be automated in that way. So I was mentioning this important thing with the CO2 reporting. This is very important because and I will explain to you, because this allows especially the problems which Armand was struggling with and also the questions were reflecting. Obviously, there's high interest in how we solve this problem. This is a major problem. So how do we actually enable impact investors to trust that where they give their money, then the money not only will be used for what they are sent, but also that they will be rewarded and that the world will become better. And I will illustrate this with a little story. So I was visiting and advising around the world, of course, on the topic. And I think about 8 years ago, 9 years ago, I think the government in Nigeria, and because Catherine also chose that country, I'm very grateful that she showed the map in which she showed the black spots. So in my advisory meeting with the Power Minister of Nigeria, he explained to me, and maybe you can see the disappointment on his face here, that they have a lot of sun, but they do not have a way to harness the power of the sun into and give light to people. So I've been preoccupied since then with how actually we can give impact investors confidence in their investments, and blockchain is giving a solution. And I ended up collaborating with two companies. So one is the Libra project, and another one is IOHK, in which I am involved deeper at this moment, especially through a collaboration with the Libra project. So I just want to mention as an example how they are approaching impact investing. So as I mentioned before, so people are given identities on blockchain. I will be speaking about this in the next slide, but I just wanted to show you an example. For example, if I, as an impact investor, and everybody can be, in this case, an impact investor, so it solves a lot of problems. So this is transnational, it is done through blockchain, and everybody can contribute with a certain amount, and this is to be determined from case to case. But let's say I have about $200,000 invested. Then I can get, again, through this algorithmic governance, through this self-executable contract, I can program actually how and calculate the daily amount. Obviously, this can be measured, but the daily, from the daily amount of energy, given my contribution to the investment, I can also calculate how much CO2 offset has my contribution achieved. And of course, I will also be rewarded, again, through blockchain and through this automatically calculated smart contracts and microtransactions. Automatically, I will be also rewarded for my contribution to the CO2 offset. So it is an amazing and elegant way to solve the impact investing conundrum in this space, which is not an easy feat. So, and as well, this is also going directly into the reporting for the UN with a certificate there, certified emissions. So for this, I was mentioning our Atala PRISM, our actually identity solution, and IO is calling this Atala PRISM. Atala PRISM is actually more complex than that. So it's not only, but the overarching purpose is to give economic identities to those who do not even have a bank account, obviously. So besides this, it has many other applications. So it can be used as health insurance card, for transportation, driver's license, and so on and so forth. But in this case, it is very useful because it can implement what I presented before, including tracking all this CO2 for investors, but as well to give people the opportunity to participate in this economy, in this new microeconomies, as I illustrated before. I just wanted to show, to give you an idea. I don't have the time to go in depth here, but just to show you how Libra project has created this robust framework for impact investment. And it is kind of straightforward, and I find it wonderful. And I'm still thinking, why didn't we think of this before? I've been advising, for example, MyBeat in 2012. They were one of the first who intended to do that, to allow someone from Germany to invest in solar panels in Africa. But what Libra project has achieved is going beyond that, because they actually can enable anyone to invest in larger projects, like, for example, refurbishing of an old nuclear power plant and now changing it into a renewable energy plant. And it is fascinating because of the framework which they have developed. So it's in 4 stages. First, the project is voted for by investors. So this, again, through this algorithmic governance. So people are given the opportunity to vote for project, and usually is done through the stake, how many tokens they have, which is the more I have invested in the Libra project, of course, the more say I can have on a project. And the second stage is that people can, obviously, yes, once one project was decided for, then there is a sale for digital securities for that project, and then people can invest directly in that particular project by buying those digital securities. And then there is a call for tenders for the work. So now we have to do the work to refurbish the plant and to mount the solar panels and whatever you have to do. And in the end, once this is done, Libra project is managing everything, like that it runs smoothly and everybody is getting information on their mobile phone. All the investors will know every day what's going on and how much CO2 was offset from their investment. So I'm very hopeful that very soon we will solve several of the challenges that have been presented here, and that we are still facing in this space, especially with energy and in those places which do not have at all, and in which people do not have the capability to even get a bank account, to have access to the money, which can bring them even a solar panel or the POWER-BLOX. So our identity solution is geared to create this circular economy with efficient use of national resources and sustainable development goal in mind. Thank you very much. Of course, I could tell lots of other stories and a lot more about our work, but the time is limited now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mihaela, for that. Really great intervention. You certainly made microeconomies and the circular economy, which is really quite complex development challenges, really accessible for us. So I really appreciate how you managed to make it quite simple to understand. It was an excellent intervention. And as you said, it was a really elegant way, as you described, to incentivize households to use clean energy through good behavior tokens. I really appreciated that as well. And perhaps
I just wanted to say that many may think about this as the karma credit, which China is doing like a big brother, but this is not the case. That is not happening on blockchain. People own their data. They only reveal, I reveal, to this particular bank with which I want to open a bank account, or I even don't reveal it. I reveal it to Bitlumens, and then they negotiate with, so it is much more control over our own data and behavior. Just wanted to make this point, but I didn't make it.
And I think Alexandra and I are hoping that a partnership between with Armand and really does blossom from this, because that would be a great outcome of this event.
Absolutely. I am lost also. Yes, it's mind-blowing that you brought us together. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. And so we do have quite a few questions coming in. So we have somebody in the chat. Could you please explain a little bit more about blockchain linkages to certified emission reduction generation? And do you have examples of how this is being done?
Yes, and actually I have some more on my slides if I can still,
Sure.
if you allow me to share some more. Or
are you able to already, or I give you?
I can share it myself if I'm allowed.
We have maybe just we'll keep it quick though, because you have
Okay.
2 more questions, and I want to make sure Anthony has enough time.
Okay. Well, I mean, because an image is I'm sharing. Can you see it?
Yeah.
But somehow okay, but yeah, somehow it doesn't move anymore. Now it's, at least for me, it's
Maybe use the arrow.
I probably will have to start it all again altogether. But let me find then offline. If I find it quickly, that's fine. If not, because an image is more than a 1,000 words. So so actually, yes, there is how do I say it? Substance to all this. I have a slide especially for this, and that's why I want to share it.
For the audience, I'll repeat the question. So just while we're waiting to pull up that slide, which a picture tells 1,000 words, could you please explain a bit more about how the blockchain linkages to certified emission reduction generation? And Mihaela is trying to find us some examples. So we'll give it a moment more while I prepare the additional questions.
Okay, no, just now. Okay, I think now it will work. Let's see. Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful. Yes, so it's exactly what you see here. So it is, you see, so there are, well, it's not so easy. That's why I wanted you to understand. So these are, it's done through 2 separate companies. So we have a Libra Impact Ledger Technologies, which deals with the digital securities. And then there's the equity shareholders, founder and seed, which is the Libra Project Asset Management. So there is a relationship between 2 entities in order to achieve this. So this one is actually the one which is reporting directly to the UN. They are connected, yes, to the impact ledger, which is actually taking the data directly from the plants. So it is, I just wanted, I don't know if this image is complete enough, but it's quite complex. And also the offerings which are done, it's like for two companies. So one is which is in relationship with the UN, and one which is in relationship with the investors. So it is, I'm getting on my own phone what I'm interested in. Yes, I want to be happy and at peace. But then all these CO2 offsets are being summed up and certified by the UN through this other entity, and then put on the ledger. Okay, today that has happened. The process is, of course, I mean, the UN has this certification. Probably you can speak more to it, in what does this consist and so on. So you have to be registered. Your technologies obviously will tell, probably also Armand can say, yes, the technology itself can tell. The sensors around the house can tell that I'm not using any more pollutants, there is no pollution. Also, Catherine mentioned the satellites. So satellites are also involved in this case because they measure at another scale the depletion of the wood, yes, the forest. So it is not used anymore, the solar panels are there. So there are various ways to quantify this. There are many ways to skin this cat, and they are not easy, but they are being sought together with the entrepreneurs, but also, of course, respecting the standards. As I was mentioning before, I've been working in standards quite a lot. It's a lengthy process. It's not simple, but we've been thinking about this, and especially the Libra project. I invited them to this call. I do not know if they can also have the opportunity to say something.
I do have an additional question here from the Libra project, although I'm conscious of time. So Mihaela, I will give you the question, and just if you can give us a quick answer, great, before we pass it over. Alternatively, we can come back to that at the end if we have time, but it is from Andrew Ralston, who I see is also on the call. Yes. So with the adoption of blockchain technology, do you think tokenizing renewable energy investments will contribute towards solving the energy crisis? This sounds like a big question. In geographies that do not have access to reliable and clean sources of energy?
Yes, I think so. And I think this is what we already showed. I showed it in my first figure with how the solar panels, POWER-BLOX, you name it, all together can displace the use of kerosene and and those people have nothing practically. Those geographies have nothing. You know, they even probably, I don't want to speak for them. I'm just speaking for myself. When I was a child, I could even not dream of a solar panel. And that is the situation with Nigeria, in which I explained. I mean, they could not afford them. Those geographies don't have a replacement. But with blockchain, we can enable that. And yeah, no, that was a big question, but not difficult because I already have addressed it in my talk.
Yes, and you also have a gift of making things very accessible. So thank you so much, Mihaela. I really appreciate your time. And now we'd move on to our final speaker for the day. A very warm welcome to Anthony Garello. He is the Director of the Department of Energy of the Government of Vanuatu. So Anthony's had a long career in technology, working initially as a mobile and ICT engineer before serving as the Principal Scientific Officer of Urban Electrification within the Department of the Energy of Vanuatu. And he is since 2016, he became the Director of the Department of Energy and is a longtime partner of UNDP as well. So welcome, Anthony, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Caroline. Can you see my screen?
You are muted, Caroline.
Thanks, Alex. You might just have to go into the big screen setting as we did before.
Okay.
I think it's display settings. Yeah, try that. Okay, go back. I think it's fine. I can see it quite well. I think for those who can't see it perfectly, maybe just enhance the screen. As we know, we all have to adapt to these new times of technology. Over to you, Anthony. Yes,
we can see it.
Perfect.
Okay. Thank you. Firstly, thank you for the opportunity to present on a experience for Vanuatu. I think we've heard previous speakers talking about innovative technologies such as the POWER-BLOX that we've heard from Aman giving us a pretty good presentation and the beauty of the POWER-BLOX. And as well, previous speakers talking about the investment guarantee for the investors, efficient ways of approaching or making a bankable projects. I think for Vanuatu, we were fortunate to be working alongside a very good partner, which is UNDP, to pilot such innovative technology as the POWER-BLOX. So I think as of 2020, we've started off with the pilot in one of the North Shore Island, just outside of Efate, which is called Lelepa. But I think before I provide an overview of the experience we had with the POWER-BLOX, I'd like to provide a brief overview of the country context. I believe some of the people who are attending this forum or event may are well aware of Vanuatu, but for those who are not really, or do not really have good knowledge of Vanuatu, I think is in the Pacific Island. In terms of population, pretty much we are around 300,000, which would roughly equates to 53,000 households. Majority of the people resides in the isolated or off-grid islands, which services, government services to those peoples, I would say it's very limited at this stage. Our key economy sector, subsistence agriculture, we rely pretty much heavily on tourism. Unfortunately, COVID has impacted a lot the tourism sector. However, it's brought the new normal for us, adjusting to the new normal. And then, of course, we have financial services and livestock. Like other many Pacific Island countries, we're subject to vulnerable natural disasters like cyclones, flooding, earthquakes, landslide, tsunami, and so forth. In terms of the energy space or the energy sector in Vanuatu, we are characterized by low access. We have more or less 82 islands, isolated islands, to which roughly 60 are habited. Therefore, this would makes it very difficult for us to reach those islands to ensure that all of these people in the islands have access to an affordable energy services. Cost of fossil fuel is quite expensive as well, given our location. Usually we are the last spot to receive any shipment that is shipped out from Singapore. And I believe that would be a reason why we've been, I mean, the cost of fossil fuel is expensive. And not only because of that, but I think it relates to the quality of fuel we are importing as well. That is a high standard fuel of, I think, 50 ppm, I guess. Geographically and geological characteristics of the natural parish, the market and centralized system of energy supplies. Many of the communities, like I said, in the islands do not have access to energy, and therefore severely impacting the development of the country. We have a fair share of renewable energy sources, geothermal, hydro, potentials of wind, and of course solar. It's obvious you can easily implement pretty much anywhere around the globe. And I guess that's the current market we have in Vanuatu and other countries as well. Solar has been shown in Vanuatu and other parts of the Pacific, like I said, as the most reliable and cost-effective approach in terms of basic electrification in the rural areas in Vanuatu. And like I said, that's the current market for Vanuatu these days. Specific challenges in terms of access to energy. We have the high cost. We've heard Arman touch echoing out a bit on the cost of solar home systems and how they've decided to come up with this innovative technology. So, of course, the high cost of putting in energy systems such as standalone grids is very obvious for Vanuatu, not only because of the technology itself, but also the cost, logistical cost of bringing it to the islands and so forth. Scalability restriction, it's a common, or I would say rather a obvious challenge for us. As you would appreciate, the islands are scattered, therefore it's impossible to, not really impossible, but it's more or less difficult to scale up the energy services in the islands. And again, the reliability of technologies that we are implementing over the years. We've been, I think it's more or less relating as well to the standards we've been employing, but we've sort of trialing out a whole number of technologies to sort of provide access to the community. So, and I think that's one of the reasons why, with the assistance of UNDP, we thought that, okay, why not pilot an innovative technology like the POWER-BLOX itself, which seems to be offering a solutions of a lot of the challenges we are encountering. Therefore, that we've as of 2020, we've scaled up out of starting off from electrifying 5 buildings, rather community buildings. We've scaled that system, the POWER-BLOX system, to cover the entire village. So just a little bit on the Lelepa Swamp Grid initiative. Like I said, Lelepa is located in the northwest coast of Evate, with a population of around 500 people. And roughly 120 households, school, kindergarten, churches are the main beneficiaries, which no access to sustainable and reliable electricity prior the POWER-BLOX. It is the first of its kind in Vanuatu, and I believe in the Pacific as well, that we've piloted this innovative technology, which, like I said earlier, we started off in 2019, and then 2020, the scale-up project began. And as of today, we've pretty much electrified the entire community, and basically it's divided into 3 segments of the island. The community is currently benefiting from the initiative through households' access to electricity, including productive use of the income generation. And on your left, it's some of the few pictures of the community itself. And then the middle picture shows you more or less the monitoring systems, and thanks to the technology that you can fuel your consumption, how much its individual users are consuming compared to the past typical solar mini grids, to which it's a bit complicated for users not being aware of what's their consumption are in a daily basis or in a monthly basis. Therefore, I think this technology has offered a lot of solution for us in Vanuatu, and I believe the community of Lelepa themselves appreciate this technology, given the simplicity of it, the scalability of it, its modularity, and as Arman said, it offers what solar system can do, and it can go up to nano grid and mini grid. So I think that's the beauty of this technology. We did an initial impact assessment from February to May 2021, and below some of the results that or outcome of the assessment that was undertaken, and it gives us a good finding in terms of how an energy service or an innovative energy service like the POWER-BLOX can change the livelihood of an off-grid community such as Lelepa. If I can just mention a few of those findings. One is we've been promoting a lot of women in terms of supporting the daily activities, and I think if you look at the very first finding, it states that women stated that their household income have increased since installation, which have elevated their self-esteem and ability to seek and achieve changes, like to diversify their activities, hire helpers to help out meet local demand and being able to do things that they enjoy doing. And also, like in Vanuatu, most of the women in the communities, if you look at the center picture there, you could see a mother weaving baskets or from the local materials, and that's way of their income, of doing income. And having a reliable energy services, they can rather do gardening stuff during daylight, and then they can have time in the evening using the energy services they have accessing to do additional activities such as weaving and so forth. And also fishing, they're very common in fishing. They could now have a reliable service to power up fridges, to store their fishes, and then later on transport it over to the main city. So I guess that's some of the few findings that we've achieved out of the assessment. In terms of conclusions, the next step, I guess Vanuatu, as we all know, is among some of the poorest nation in the world, which is compounded by its high vulnerability to climate change, like I mentioned earlier on. However, the government of Vanuatu is determined to turn this vulnerability into strength through climate ambition. We are committed through the NDC. I think we are in the forefront as well in the Pacific in combating climate change. Therefore, we have this strong policy frameworks through our NDCs and also the NAMA, and of course our national, at the local context, the National Energy Roadmap. The swarm technology, in our view, and based on the pilot we've seen, it offers a lot of solution to the challenges that we've encountered while trying to implement the roadmap. Like I've earlier, it's easy to install, operate, maintain, and of course, reliable and mostly cost effective. With the experience that I've seen with the LELEPA grid compared to the other grids that we've implemented around Vanuatu, it's very cost effective, and it's much, I would say, more or less 2 times or 3 times less than the typical solar mini grids we've been implementing. I think building on LELEPA pilot with the swarm technology, this gives us room for us having this more or less 1 or 2 years of exploring the swarm technology. It gives us a room for us to scale that similar technology into other islands of the rest of the islands of Vanuatu, subject to financial capacity that we may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anthony, for that really important intervention. I think that summarizes our webinar really well, to look at how some of these technologies are actually applied in real life situations and really put to the test here, and showing how energy poverty can be improved and eliminated in a country like Vanuatu in many instances, and really improving the livelihoods of people, and especially women. So thank you so much, Anthony. We did go over, but in my opinion, it was worth it. So I do apologize for being a little bit behind. I think we've had a really, really interesting panel. We've heard from a lot of amazing speakers here today. So just before we wrap it up, I would really love to take a photo of the panelists. So if you wouldn't mind just all putting on your cameras, and I will put it into view so we can take one screenshot. Yeah, I'm just taking a picture. Great, and to all our attendees, we really appreciate you here today, and thank you for tuning in. On behalf of UNDP and my co-moderator here, Alexandra, we really appreciate it, and thank you very much. Please check out the rest of the Ministerial Thematic Forum happening this week. Okay, have a great evening or morning to a colleague in Vanuatu, and ciao. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you for a wonderful moderation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
My pleasure as well. Bye.